Hello. In this Under the Hood video about constructors, I'll demonstrate what the effect is in memory when invoking a default constructor, when passing 4 arguments to a constructor, and the copy constructor. So this is the rectangle class displaying the constructors as implemented in the hands-on video. We implemented the default constructor, setting the height and width to some initial valid values according to the specifications. We implemented the copy constructor, the 2 parameters constructor, and a 4 parameters constructor. In the following client codes, I'll demonstrate the creation of a rectangle using the default constructor, then creating a rectangle object passing 4 arguments for x, y, height, and width. And in the third object, I'm using the copy constructor, where I want to create a new object and initialize its properties using the properties of the already existing rectangle 2 object. Both rectangle 2 and 3 will be different objects, but their properties will have the same value. Executing this code creates the following outputs. So the output of the first object rect1, the output of the second object rect2, the output of the third object rect3. So different object but same value of properties. Let's see what happens under the hood with first of all the default constructor. So what happens when executing following statement? So we create a new object, new rectangle. Now we have seen this in the previous under the hood videos, but there'll be a slight difference. The first part is the same. First of all, the declaration of rect1 allocates space on the stack. Then new rectangle creates an object on the heap with its default value, but then, and here's the difference, in previous videos we assigned the address of the object to rect1, but we skipped the actual details of the creation and initialization of an object. So what happens when we do new rectangle? So the object is created on the heap thanks to the new operator, and as we saw in a previous video, initialization happens in a constructor. Which constructor in our case? The default constructor, the one that is invoked automatically when we don't pass any arguments. So first of all, the stack frame of the constructor is set up, initializing the this pointer, which is implicitly available. But we don't get the this pointer now from rect1. The this pointer refers to the current object that is being constructed, namely the object located at address 1000. That's for initializing the current stack frame for now. Then we execute statements in the default constructor. So 2 local variables. I abbreviate here min h. This stands for minimum height and minimum width, because I don't have enough space to write it in full. So 2 local variables will be allocated on the stack, minimum height having a value of 10 and minimum width as well. And then we invoke the setter. Every rectangle object must be in a valid state. The default values of 0 for height and width are not acceptable, and that's why we decided to invoke the setter. Now, I've demonstrated the setters during the previous topic of encapsulation and validation. So if you want to know what happens behind the scenes of the set height, I recommend you to watch that video. So the setter, basically what it's going to do is going to pass the value of minimum height, 10, this local variable, and set the height property of our objects. So what set height does behind the scenes is assign the height parameter to this.height. I'm going to execute it. The value of 10 is copied. Same for the width, so copy the value of the local variable to the property of the objects. Okay, our object is in a valid state. That's enough for the default constructor. We return to the main, destroying the current stack frame, and then the assignment is performed, and rect1 is referring now to a nicely initialized rectangle with values 0 for x and y and 10 for height and width. That for the default constructor. The second constructor we'll examine is the one to which we can pass 4 arguments, x, y, height and width. Second reference variable, rect2, and on the stack, new rectangle. So an object with its default properties on the heap, all properties set to 0. This will invoke the constructor, passing the 4 arguments. Now I don't have enough space here to write in full int x, int y, int height, int width. So that's why I wrote the 3 dots. It is not an exotic Java notation. This is just because I don't have enough space. Okay. This constructor will be invoked. So setting up the stack frame for this constructor, initializing the this pointer, which is implicitly available, and referring to the second objects. Then we pass all 4 arguments to initialize the 4 parameters. So x, y, height, and width will be allocated within the current stack frame, and the values of the arguments will be used to initialize those parameters. So 10, 20, 100, 200. Then executing statements within the constructor, set x and set y. So again, invoking the setters, passing as arguments the local variables. So first of all, set x 10 will be used to initialize this.x as implemented in the setter. The same for set y 20 to this.y in the setter. Then the set heights 100 to the height property, and the set width 200 to the width property. And that's it. We leave the constructor. Control is back in the main. Current stack frame will be removed, and rect2 now refers to the second object. That for this constructor. Finally, let's examine the copy constructor. For that, we'll use a third reference variable, rect3, allocated on the stack. New rectangle. So first, the object is constructed on the heap with default values to a new fictional address, 3000. All properties set to 0. And now the purpose of the copy constructor is that the values of the properties, so the actual content of the member variables, will be the same as the content of the properties of rectangle 2. And we pass the reference of rectangle 2 to the copy constructor. So the properties of rectangle 2 will be used to initialize the properties of rectangle 3. So the constructor is invoked. Setting up the stack frame, the this pointer implicitly referring to the third object, and then passing the parameter rect2 to a parameter rect. So rect will be on the stack in the current stack frame. And what value will it receive? The value of rect2. Rect2 is 2000, the reference variable referring to the second object. So we initialize rect, and rect now refers as well to the second object. That for setting up the stack frame, and now executing the setters. So set x is now going to use as argument rect.x. So rect address 2000, we follow the arrow, so to speak. What field do we need? The x field 10, and this value of 10 will now be passed to the setter of x and will be applied to the current object that is being constructed, namely the third object. So 10 will be passed to the setter to initialize the x property. The setter for y, similar, so rect.y, the value of 20 will be copied to the y property of the new objects. Then set height rect.height, so 100 will be copied to the height property of the new objects. And then finally the width, rect.width 200 will be copied to the width property. That's it. We leave the constructor back to the main. The runtime cleans up the current stack frame, and the assignment results in rect3 now referring to the third object, which is a different object, but the content of the object is the same as the content of the second object. Okay, thank you for watching this under the hood video about constructors. Bye bye.